Tolkien's wizards, that history forgot. While Gandalf's epic battle against Sauron is a tale known far and wide, he was just one of 5 wizards sent to Middle-earth. These 5 angelic beings, known as the Istari, were dispatched by the Valar from across the sea to help the free peoples. We're familiar with their stories. Saruman the White, the wise leader who ultimately fell into darkness, Radagast the Brown, who got lost in his love for nature, and Gandalf the Grey, who stood against the flames and returned as Gandalf the White, the only one to truly succeed in his mission. But what about the other 2? Gandalf wasn't alone in the long struggle against Sauron. He had 4 brothers. While Saruman succumbed to darkness and Radagast wandered off into the wild, 2 others, cloaked in sea blue, disappeared into the vast, mysterious east. For years, it was thought they had failed, lost to the shadows or ensnared by the very darkness they were sent to combat. But Tolkien's own notes tell a different, more heroic tale. Today, we're diving into the truth about the Blue Wizards and their forgotten war that paved the way for the victory in The Lord of the Rings. To unravel the mystery of the Blue Wizards, we first need to grasp the mission of the Istari. They weren't just men. They were Maiar divine spirits who took on the guise of old men to guide and inspire, not to dominate. Their orders were clear. They couldn't match Sauron's power with their own. They were meant to be advisors, sparks of hope, and persistent thorns in the Dark Lord's side. The first mention of the Blue Wizards, known as Alatar and Pallando, comes from an essay published long after Tolkien's passing in Unfinished Tales. In this version, they arrive in Middle-earth around the same time as the others, during the Third Age. Saruman, the leader of their order, travels with them into the east, into the lands of Rhûn, and beyond territories long under the Shadow's influence. But while Saruman eventually returns, Alatar and Pallando do not. They vanish from the west, never to be seen again. For a long time, that was the extent of their story, and the conclusion felt grim. In a letter from 1958, Tolkien himself expressed his doubts about their fate. He wrote, "I really do not know anything clearly about the other 2. I fear that they failed, as Saruman did, though doubtless in different ways, and I suspect they were founders or beginners of secret cults and magic traditions that outlasted the fall of Sauron." This was the failure theory. Painting a dark picture, 2 of the 5 guardians sent to protect Middle-earth either perished, were captured, or worse, became corrupted themselves, starting their own twisted kingdoms of magic deep in enemy territory. For years, this narrative held sway. The mission to the east was deemed a failure, leaving only Gandalf true to his purpose. But that's not where the story ends. Tolkien had more to say. Later in his life, Tolkien revisited the question of the Blue Wizards, and his perspective shifted dramatically. In notes that would eventually be published in The Peoples of Middle-earth, a new, far more compelling narrative emerged. He changed nearly everything from their names and arrival time to the very nature of their success. In this later version, the Blue Wizards were renamed Morinehtar and Rómestámo, meaning Darkness Slayer and East Helper, and their arrival was pushed back thousands of years. They didn't come to Middle-earth in the Third Age with Gandalf. They arrived in the Second Age, right around the time the Rings of Power were being forged and Sauron first revealed his true malice. This change is monumental. It means they weren't just part of a later relief effort. They were the first responders. Their mission was to circumvent Sauron, to venture deep behind enemy lines and stir up rebellion. They were tasked with finding the few tribes of men who hadn't fallen under Morgoth's sway and giving them the support they needed to resist. They were meant to be agents of chaos and dissent within Sauron's own realm. Think about the sheer difficulty of this task. Gandalf, Saruman, and Radagast operated in the west, where there were still great kingdoms of elves and men who remembered the light of Valinor. The Blue Wizards, however, stepped into a land that had been shrouded in darkness for millennia. They were 2 figures against entire empires dedicated to evil. Their mission wasn't to fight on the front lines, but to wage a secret war of whispers, inspiring hope where there was none, and organizing resistance networks deep within enemy-occupied lands. So, did they succeed? In Tolkien's final conception, the answer is a resounding yes. Their victory wasn't marked by grand battles or celebrated triumphs, but by quiet, unseen successes that profoundly impacted the entire history of Middle-earth. Tolkien noted that they must have had a very great influence on both the Second and Third Ages. How? By weakening and disrupting the forces of the East. He stated that without their efforts, the forces of the East would have outnumbered the West. Let that sink in for a moment. At the end of the Second Age, during the War of the Last Alliance, the West barely scraped by. High King Gil-galad was slain, Elendil fell, and Isildur claimed the ring in a moment of desperate triumph. According to Tolkien's later writings, that victory was only possible because, for centuries, the Blue Wizards had been working in the East, tying up Sauron's resources and preventing him from consolidating his full power. This reframes the entire War of the Ring. We often wonder why Sauron, with the vast lands of the East and South at his command, didn't simply overwhelm Gondor and its allies with sheer numbers. We see armies of Easterlings and Haradrim at the Pelennor Fields, but Tolkien's notes suggest that this was just a fraction of what Sauron could have mustered. The reason his armies weren't larger, the reason the West stood a chance at all, was because Morinehtar and Rómestámo had spent 2,000 years sowing dissent, sparking rebellions, and nurturing pockets of freedom behind enemy lines. Without the secret war fought by the Blue Wizards, the West would have been overrun. Gandalf's victory was only possible because of the forgotten triumph of his two blue-robed brothers, a victory won in the shadows and lost to history. This constant evolution of the lore is what makes Tolkien's world so endlessly fascinating. If you love uncovering these hidden corners of the legendarium, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. So, what really happened to the Blue Wizards? Tolkien gives us two conflicting stories, the early failure and the later success. In one, they're a tragic footnote, lost to darkness. In the other, they're the unsung heroes whose secret war saved Middle-earth. Tolkien never definitively chose one over the other, leaving their ultimate fate a tantalizing mystery. We know that of the five wizards, only Gandalf returned to the Undying Lands, suggesting that even if the Blue Wizards succeeded, their paths didn't lead them home. They may have perished in battle, or perhaps they stayed in the East, continuing their watch even after Sauron's fall. Their story resonates because it speaks to a core theme in Tolkien's work. Not all heroes get a song. The most important victories often happen far from the centers of power, by individuals whose names are never recorded in history. The Blue Wizards embody the silent, thankless struggle against evil. They were sent to hold the line in a war no one in the West would ever see, to protect a world that would never know their names. Their legacy isn't found in the Chronicles of Gondor, but in the what-ifs. What if Sauron's armies had been twice as large? What if the West had been completely alone? The story of the Blue Wizards answers those questions. They were the silent guardians, the forgotten victors, and a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest triumphs happen in the shadows. What do you think happened to the Blue Wizards? Do you lean towards the story of their failure or their hidden success? Let us know in the comments below and tell us which forgotten hero of Middle-earth we should explore next. Thanks for watching.